Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. This is the 7th or 8th video in my Starting Seeds Indoors series for 2020. So please subscribe and you can catch up, bring you all the way up to this point. Today's video is all about feeding your indoor seed starts with fertilizer. It doesn't matter if it's a chemical fertilizer, human-made, or it's an organic fertilizer. We can overlove our plants when they're in these tiny little cells and give them way too much fertilizer. When you give a plant too much fertilizer, they could turn yellow, they could turn purple. It looks like maybe they don't have enough fertilizer, so then we overlove them and we give them more, and we really damage the plants. So the general rule that I recommend, and over the last 6 years, I've been guilty of falling into this, belief that we have to put all kinds of different stuff into our seed starting mix to have the plants be healthy, and that's just not true. So I apologize for the old videos, but I've learned. Best thing to do is mimic nature. Worm casting tea works great for these things. But we all can't access that. So when we're using the fertilizers, organic or not organic, we want to use a really low amount of NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. What does that mean? Really? We want to take the N down to a 1, the P down to a 1, the K down to a 1. It's a 1-1-1 fertilizer. Compost that we use in our garden, which nature makes, is well below a 1-1-1 NP and K. You just need a little bit amount of the chemicals, the elements that these plants need. Don't overdo it. You'll be really disappointed. So when do you feed them? So these plants have been growing anywhere from 3 weeks to 4 weeks. There is no fertilizer in any of this. Today's January 8th. I started some of the plants on December 10th. This is lavender, growing very slowly. Some tomato plants. It's too early for tomato plants, but these are for videos. These are started around 12-20. And then I got a couple of plants from the 16th of December. So once they germinate, somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you're going to want to feed your plant. It all really depends on the variety. If your plants start looking yellow and you haven't fed them anything, then that's a sign you want to feed them. And it's okay if they turn a little bit yellow because you know they don't have any food. You give them some fertilizer, they're going to be okay. But if we keep putting in tons of stuff and the plant leaves change and problems happen, we have no idea what we did. So before we get to feeding, and again we're going to feed anywhere from 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks after germination, you have to understand what the different products are. So I always use a 1 gallon jug. Most of these things are set up, the directions tell you how to set up, the ratios with 1 gallon of water. These are all water-soluble fertilizers. In the past, again, I was guilty of using insoluble organic fertilizers like blood meal, bone meal. And what that means is when you put blood meal and bone meal into your starting mix, there's no soil life. It's an insoluble fertilizer, insoluble, and it really needs soil life to digest it, break it down, and turn the N, P, and K into a soluble form that mixes with water, and then the root systems can pull it in. So all I was really doing when I would put in the bone meal and blood meal was putting in stuff that would create mold and fungus. So you don't need it. You don't want insoluble types. You don't want the dry fertilizers, basically. You want the water soluble. That's fertilizer that mixes with water. The N, the P, and the K are in water soluble form. So when the roots absorb it, or when the starting mix absorbs it with the water and everything is nice and moist, the root system can easily pull in the N, P, and K. So you want soluble fertilizer. So we have a couple of types. This is a Miracle-Gro product. This is Stay Green. They're chemical type fertilizers, which means they're made by people. Everything on the planet's a chemical. So the real difference is the organic fertilizers tend to be products like fish emulsion, bone meal, blood meal, animal products, animal blood, emulsified fish, not created by you or me. So let's start with the Miracle-Gro product. This is an all-purpose plant food. It is a 12, 4, 8, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. That is way too high. What I recommend nowadays is to try and take this down well below a 555. If you can get to a 111, that's perfect. Any product you buy is going to have all kinds of different ratios on there, so you have to read through it and understand it. I like to write onto the container because I have to wear glasses and I forget, so I don't like wearing my glasses, so I can flip it over. It's written out nice and big. So let me get in close with the fertilizer. This is really, really important. So with this product, the percentage is 12, 4, and 8. So that really means that when you mix it into a gallon, you're going to have 12% nitrogen, 4% phosphorus, 8% potassium. So how do you know which one is the right ratio? Because if you read the label, it tells you for houseplants, use 1 teaspoon per gallon. And that means they really want you to use a low amount because you don't want these concentrating in high levels into your seed starting mix. So typically it's whatever the ratio is for the garden is the ratio that creates 12%, 4%, 8%, or whatever the fertilizing product is that you're using. So for here it says 4 teaspoons into 2 gallons. That's what you use in a garden. Well, I'm using a 1 gallon container, so right away I cut that in half. So 2 teaspoons into 1 gallon creates a 12, 4, 8 ratio. I want that to come down, so instead of 2 teaspoons, I'm going to use 1 teaspoon per gallon. So that cuts this in half. That brings this to a 6, 2, 4. So 1 teaspoon is a 6, 2, 4. So now I'm going to use half of a teaspoon, another halving, so the 6, 2, 4 becomes a 3, 1, 2. So by using a half a teaspoon per gallon, I turn this so the half a teaspoon makes this a 3, 1, 2 fertilizer. And that's what you want to use with your seed starts. Really, really keep it low. You could bring it down lower if you wanted to, but if you keep cutting it down, it kind of gets hard to measure. So a 3-1-2 is perfectly fine. Don't overfeed the plants. I know that it's confusing, but what you're doing is some basic math. You're just cutting down the directions by half or by a third or by a quarter to bring this ratio down. And what this says is, again, a teaspoon, and here's a measuring scoop. Right in there where the lines are is a teaspoon. I prefer using the chemical type fertilizers for my seed starts. It doesn't wreck organic gardening. It doesn't mean you're a terrible person. So a little bit too much. That's half of a dose. We want about a quarter of a dose. Something like that. And then we're just going to put that into 1 gallon of water. Now, why do I prefer that? So the human-made fertilizers are really good because they cover everything. They cover macronutrients, micronutrients, trace elements, everything your plants need. Because there's no ecosystem here in the soil, there's no biological, there's no microbes in here, there's nothing in here. You don't have to worry about using these types of fertilizers and killing out soil life. They don't need them at this point. Some people will argue with me, and that's fine, but I've been doing this for 20 years. You don't need it for seed starting. So we've created a ratio that brings us down below a 555 NP and K, as close as we can get to a 111. And all you do is pour this in, just like you're watering, which would be about a quarter of the way of the seed tray. You can mark this as your fertilizer. And you can go to it about every week to 2 weeks while your seed starts are still growing indoors. You go to every 2 weeks. You stay at every 2 weeks when they're small, they just don't need a lot. You go to every week when they're bigger and are getting ready to go outside. By using this lower ratio, and we're going to go over the other products, these are the organic products. By using this lower ratio, you're not going to damage your plants. And if for some reason you see them turning a little bit of a color, you can add a little bit more fertilizer. Instead of waiting, another week, just give them a little bit more fertilizer that day. This is the best way to keep your plants safe. So We also have another fertilizer. This is Stay Green. This is a chemical type. The scoop for this is 1 teaspoon per gallon, and you would do the same thing. You would just keep dividing it in half until you bring these ratios down. It's up to you which one you want to use. So we come to fish fertilizer, which I love using in the garden. If you use the organic fertilizers inside, they're going to smell. That's, just part of what happens. This is a 5-1-1, 5 nitrogen, 1 phosphorus, 1 potassium. That's pretty good. What is interesting is, if you can look at this little mark here, it's typically 2 tablespoons per gallon. So it'd be 2 tablespoons creates a 5-1-1 fertilizer. This one says for container plants, use 1 tablespoon. So they're asking you to use less right here. This is Super Thrive. This is an organic product. And it says right here to use less for transplant seedlings. So they're already telling you don't use these at full strength for your transplants. And these are going to be transplants. So Super Thrive is just another organic fertilizer. I'm sorry. It's 4 tablespoons per 1 gallon, creates a 4-1-1 ratio. That's what you use for the outside. What it's saying for transplants is to use 1 teaspoon per gallon. They're already knocking this way, way, way down. And that's probably what you can take from this video, is you don't have to be exactly at a 5.55 NPK or a 1.11 NPK. It's just really low amounts. And the instructions will tell you this is 1 teaspoon per gallon for transplants. And I would just set it up the same way, is read it, figure out what the maximum dose is. Let's go back to the fish emulsion. 2 tablespoons per gallon. That's a 5-1-1. They're telling you to use only 1 tablespoon per gallon for container plants. So I would definitely go to probably half a tablespoon per gallon for my seed starts. And that's going to be a perfectly fine N, P, and K. I know that it's confusing, but if you take anything from this video, you want extremely low levels of N, P, and K. So let's come on over to this one. These are tomato plants. I just wanted to show you a couple of things. Again, none of these have been fertilized. It's been 3 or 4 weeks for these plants. They look perfectly fine. They actually live off of the seed coat. You can see some purpling in there on the undersides of the leaves sometimes. When your tomato plants have purple on them, that's perfectly normal. That's going to happen. Sometimes your pepper plants will have a little bit of purple on them. But again, at this size, 3 or 4 weeks in, we want to, I just watered these a couple days ago. You should actually, let these dry out on top and then add in the fertilizer. But for the sake of the video, we'll give them a little bit more. Extremely low amounts of N, P, and K. About a quarter of the way. And then just drop your plants back in. You're going to do this every 1 to 2 weeks. And when the plants are like this tall, it's about every week. When they're around here, every 2 weeks is perfectly fine. Do not overfeed your plants. I've been doing this for a long time now. Low N, P, and K, and you'll have great seed starts. Thanks for watching, and please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com.